Okay, through much of yesterday and last night, our state have obviously seen a very intense period of rainfall. This has resulted in flooding, storm damage and road closures over many parts of the Adelaide metropolitan area, Mount Lofty Ranges, Onkaparinga, Fleurieu Peninsula and surrounding areas, as well as into Kangaroo Island. The Emergency Management Council Cabinet Committee has just received an update from authorities on the response and the recovery efforts from this most recent flood event. The State Emergency Service is currently the lead responsible agency and the State Emergency Centre remains on standby. I can report the following. Moderate flooding is still expected in the lower Onkaparinga River and Old Noarlunga throughout Thursday morning. On Monday, upon confirmation of the forthcoming extreme weather events, emergency services and other government authorities began planning for their response to this event. This included the commencement of the release of water from Mount Bold Reservoir in accordance with protocols which have been released downstream over the ensuing days. Flood warnings are still current for the Angus, Bremer, Gawler and Onkaparinga rivers. The SES received around 751 calls yesterday and a further 93 calls today. There are currently only a handful of outstanding jobs. The majority of calls for assistance for the SES responded relating to clearing trees, flooding of houses and the clearing of roads, roughly a third of each of the inquiries in those three areas. Throughout the night, SES crews in SAPOL were involved in door knocking and evacuations within the area of Old Noarlunga as the swollen lower Onkaparinga River reached its peak and overlapped into residential areas. I can report that about 80 homes have been damaged or inundated with water. We expect that number will rise as we learn more about the impact. A number of homes have had to be evacuated. A substantial number of people have been unable to access their homes in the Waterfall Gully road area due to road closures, and we're working to get that road open so that residents can return to their homes. The impact to homes has also been predominantly felt in Torrens Park, Fife Street, Aldgate, Waterfall Gully, Forestville, Hawthorn and, as I mentioned, in Old Noarlunga. Around 39 roads have been closed and our effort is obviously going into opening those roads as quickly as possible. Dipty and Council will give priority opening roads to provide safe access to residents and also to business owners and eventually general commuters. Information on the status of road closures is best found on www.traffic.sa.gov.au. So if you've got any doubts about whether your road remains open, consult that website. Currently only one bus service is affected by road closures and commuters should check the Adelaide Metro website for details about their particular route. All metropolitan jetties have now been reopened to the public. 2 new recovery centres have been opened at Old Noarlunga Institute Hall, Patapinda Road, Old Noarlunga and Burnside Civic Centre on 401 Greenhill Road, Burnside. These centres provide a safe place if you can't return to your home and can also provide overnight accommodation. People can also call the recovery hotline for assistance on 1800 302 787 and the Glenunga and Aberfoyle Park relief centres that were open last night have now been closed. The government is making emergency relief funds available, $700, as well as flood clean-up grants of $700 for those directly affected by the flood, subject to eligibility criteria. Now, there has been some suggestion by members of the public that they're worried that they can't clean or touch their homes before any assessment by an insurance company. I'm advised that obviously you should only return to your house when it's safe to do so, but having done that, you can contact your insurance company as soon as possible to check what your policy does include or exclude and seek guidance as to the claims process. But you can start cleaning up the home, but it is prudent to first take pictures or videos of any of the damage and keeping some of the evidence of the damage so that you can tender that as evidence of your claim. So people shouldn't be prevented from beginning the process of cleaning up, which apparently is one of the rumours that's spreading around. For more information, people can go to a good website on www.sa.gov.au/flood or call 1800 302 787. Obviously, there's been an extraordinary amount of work that's been going on during the course of yesterday evening and indeed today. I want to thank all of our volunteers, in particular our state emergency services volunteers, for their outstanding work in relation to the response. They've also been ably assisted by both the South Australian Police Force, the Metropolitan Fire Service, and of course the CFS, all of whom have pitched in to assist in this effort. While many of us were at home warm and safe, they were out clearing trees, filling sandbags and assisting hundreds and hundreds of South Australians in their time of need. It's extraordinary work that they do, and I want to thank them all for their wonderful public service. There are a number of important messages that I do want to pass on though to the South Australian community. First of all, don't drive through floodwaters. It represents a real risk to you and your families to drive through floodwaters. Don't play or swim in floodwaters. Floodwater and mud can contain sewage. There's an increased risk of wound infections and other health-related complications from floodwaters. So don't play around in those floodwaters. In particular, don't allow your children to do so. Please don't go into areas that have been prohibited. I appreciate that access to your home being blocked is incredibly frustrating, but we have to act on the advice of our emergency authorities, and there are good reasons why people are being excluded from returning to homes. It may well be that the road is dangerous or unstable, debris may be in the water that can cause injury, sharp or heavy objects may be concealed. Contaminated water can cause health problems, and electrical problems can exist with both wiring and appliances that have become wet. The prime concern now to the SES is the recovery process, restoring people to their homes, making sure that residents can move back into them. The State Emergency Service is warning the public in affected areas to remain vigilant and to continue to ensure their own safety when they're re-entering their homes after flooding. People who have experienced flooding should engage an electrician to check out wiring and appliances before turning anything on. People are advised to wear protective clothing, including gloves, during clean-up to avoid contact with contaminated water. We're also warning people to stay away from fallen power lines. Always assume that fallen power lines are live, and they should be reported to SA Power Networks on 131366. Now we know from the Bureau of Meteorology that additional rain has been forecast for the coming week. Notably, Saturday will be a wet day, but significant falls are not forecast. So if people do see that steady rain, they shouldn't become alarmed. At the moment, as presently advised, we believe that while this will be a concern and it will be monitored carefully, we believe that the additional rain will be significant, but will be wet but not significant. Further rain though in the following week will require further discussion with the Bureau of Meteorology as confidence in the outlook improves. We know that there is a substantial weather event which will be in the region of the state. We don't yet know the location. We're waiting for Bureau of Meteorology advice. Of course, the catchments are very wet, and so there does remain a risk of a further event, but we'll act on that advice once it's tendered to us. But once again, I want to conclude by thanking everybody who has contributed to this effort. The sensible behaviour of residents, but the wonderful actions of our volunteers and our emergency services. So thank you everybody for the efforts that you've made, and do take heed of the warnings and the advice that are provided by our emergency services authorities.
Premier, is the government willing to help councils? I've been at Waterfall Gully Road this morning, which has been washed away in parts, and obviously we've seen the photos of Montague Road and others too. Is the government willing to help out with councils in repairing some of that damage?
Absolutely. There are schemes that if they exceed certain limits, they trigger state government contributions, so we stand ready to assist local councils, assisting them to repair their local roads. Of course, there will be some state roads that will require significant repair. Montague Road in particular looks to have suffered very significant damage, remains closed. and does appear to need a very substantial repair job.
And in the longer term, councils further south around Brown Hill Creek have been asking for the state government to contribute to the flood mitigation scheme down there. Is that going to be any closer?
Well, if you're talking about the Brown Hill Creek flood mitigation plan, it's settled. It's now an agreed plan. It has agreed funding and an agreed timeline for implementation. After many, many years of councils not being able to agree on where the work should be and what the work should be, they've now finally agreed those things, and so that's a good thing, and it's ready to roll out, not before time.
But the Mitcham Mayor says that the money that's been contributed by the state government is a drop in the ocean compared to what's needed. Are you prepared to?
It's agreed. It's an agreed program which has an agreed timeline, a 50% contribution from the state and the local government. It's been a long time coming, there's no doubt about that, but largely it's because councils couldn't agree amongst themselves about what the projects should be. In the last federal election, Federal Labor actually agreed to contribute a substantial amount of money which would have accelerated those works, but obviously they're not formed a government, so that is something that could happen. The federal government could get involved, but certainly the state and local government have now got a plan.
So
What
of
is
the
that
140
plan? How
million that it would cost, you're saying the state government's contributing 50%, because I was told by the Mayor that they're contributing $4 million a year.
That's right. It's a $4 million a year over 30 years program. That's our commitment. Remember that stormwater is fundamentally a local government responsibility. The state government, though, stepped in to contribute. First we increased the $2 million that used to go into $4 million, and then we said that we'd extend it over 30 years to give them a funding stream against which they could borrow to actually do these much needed works. And there is a plan in place to do that work, and it should roll out. It should have happened years ago, but now we're finally being able to reach agreement.
30 years is a long time, given what we saw yesterday. Do you think we have that much time?
No, it'd be great if it was accelerated, but it's a matter for councils to accept their responsibilities and invest in this infrastructure. But we're doing something which previous governments hadn't done. We're contributing a very substantial and long-term set of commitments. It would be speeded up if the Commonwealth also got involved, and Federal Labor did have a proposal to do that.
But
Has there
would it
any
be sped
assessment
up?
been made of the total damage bill from this event?
Not yet. It's way too early to assess that, but and also where the burden falls. Some of it will fall in state roads, some in local roads.
Safe to say it'll
Obviously,
be
a lot of
millions of dollars, though?
Yeah, of course, and there's obviously a lot of private sector damage to private property that will now become, in many respects, an insurance issue.
And in regard to Old Noarlunga, is the threat over there, or is there still concern there? And is there also concern that they released too much water from Mount Bold?
Well, the first thing to say about that is that you just heard from Chris that there remains a concern about the lower Onkaparinga, and we are monitoring that situation, although the river levels do seem to be subsiding. Of course, we're expecting a further weather event on Saturday, although it's forecast at the moment not to be substantial. But there is another weather event which is coming during the course of the week, and we don't yet know where the rain will fall. Once the Bureau of Meteorology becomes clearer, if the weather event falls in the same area, it's going to replicate, obviously, the conditions, and given that the catchment remains wet, there could be further concerns, but at the moment we don't know that.
So in this instance, did authorities not act quickly enough to start releasing water earlier in the week when we knew that this forecast was coming?
They did release water earlier in the week.
Enough?
They released water on Monday in accordance with their protocols. So what happens is the Bureau of Meteorology provides advice directly to SA Water. SA Water have a protocol, and they then release water in accordance with that protocol. And obviously, as the sudden nature of the water comes into the system, they also release further water. So that's the protocol, and I'm advised that that protocol was followed in this case.
So should Old Noarlunga residents be on edge over the next few days for upcoming releases?
Well, I think they should remain vigilant, but at the moment the advice is that the water levels are subsiding, and that the weather event on Saturday is not substantial enough to create an additional flood risk, although it needs to be monitored. But there is a further weather event, and we don't quite know where that is going to land in South Australia yet. If it's in the same area, obviously it will remain a risk, and we will advise the community about that increased risk once we have clarity from the Bureau of Meteorology.
On the broader issue of flood mitigation, are you happy with how how it's gone, how the system's worked in this case?
Well, no, I mean, it would be ideal if these works had been done decades ago, but there's been a long-standing, if you like, stalemate around investment in stormwater mitigation. It's not to say that there aren't very substantial investments in stormwater mitigation that have occurred around the state, but in this particular area, the Brown Hill catchment, there's been a long-standing standoff, and fortunately it's resolved now, but it's going to take a number of years to build the infrastructure that will make a contribution to mitigating these sorts of effects. We also have to remember these are very sudden storm water events, and there will always be pressure on any system, even if it did have this additional investment.
So you talked about speeding up those works around Brown Hill Creek area. Couldn't that be done if the government gave the money up front rather than drip feeding it over a number of decades?
Well, this is not a state government responsibility. We're contributing, we think, generously to what is actually a local government responsibility. And at the request of local government, we provided this long-term commitment of $4 million per annum over an extended period of 30 years, so that they could have a stream of funding to go to a stormwater management authority, which could then borrow to essentially put in place the works that were necessary to carry out the mitigation. So we've done what we've been requested of local government. I'm sure they'd like more money from state government, but this is principally an area of their responsibility.
Those $700 payments, what's the threshold for those? What has
That's
to
per
happen?
family, so there are certain thresholds for different members of the family, but as a family you can access that pretty much for the asking. It's very much an emergency payment to meet out-of-pocket expenses associated with being away from your home. Then of course the clean-up has its own expenses, another $700 to do that immediately, so maybe getting some assistance in. And then overnight accommodation can also be provided, which will be in addition to that. So there are a range of different pots of money which are available immediately to deal with immediate loss. Of course, we do encourage people to speak to their insurance companies.